is called Opportunities to Integrate Resources for Success. And the word I'd really like you to focus on there are the opportunities and the decision points. And thinking about all of the different decisions that are made as part of the public safety system, from the point of arrest all the way through to disposition, violations, supervision in the community, and what opportunities are available to counties at each of those decision points to do something a little bit different. And the panelists that we have today are going to talk about decisions that they made at different points in their system and how they have worked together collaboratively amongst different agencies to do something a little bit different. We're going to start out with the Santa Clara County Pretrial Diversion effort, and James Gibbons Shapiro, from the Deputy District Attorney from Santa Clara, is going to be talking about the work that they're doing. We're also going to talk about Placer County's collaborative efforts to triage resources according to risk, which we talked about a lot last year for those of you who were here, taking a risk-based approach to supervision and making sure that your resources were focused on those who most needed them. And then our third presenters are going to be from the Sacramento counties, talking about their collaborative approach to responding to violations of PRCS and parole supervision. What do you do now with the folks who are in your jail and in your local courts as you're dealing with violations, and what's the most effective way to hold individuals accountable and also make the best use of the resources that you have available? As I mentioned earlier, we're going to allow the panel to present, and then there'll be the opportunities for questions afterwards. So if you do have a question at any point, feel free to just raise that index card or that piece of paper up in the air, and we'll make sure that those get up to the front. But for now, I would like to turn it over to Santa Clara and James Gibbons Shapiro to start us off.
Do you have slides?
And yeah, the slide should be coming up.
Good morning, everybody. I'm James Gibbons Shapiro. I'm the supervisor of the misdemeanor team at the Santa Clara County DA's office. And I'm going to talk to you about a group of changes that we've made in the last couple years. And I'll preface it by saying I'm not going to be saying that we've done something revolutionary or new that we have invented. It was a lot of things that were revolutionary and new for us, but there are things that we saw that other counties were doing that we put our toe in the water, and some of you have been swimming around in the water of diversion in large ways for a while. And then we were also looking at things that we'd already been doing and say, what can we do more in that? As a way to resolve misdemeanors in a different way, to divert misdemeanors before they even hit the court system in order to make sure that we had accountability for the people who are committing misdemeanors, to make sure there was restitution for our victims, and also to be mindful of our very limited resources in our county jails for misdemeanor defendants. So I want to start with some of the challenges that we face in our county. So Santa Clara County on an average year prosecutes about 50,000 criminal cases a year, and about 30,000 of those are misdemeanors. And like you, we have limited jail space, limited number of courtrooms, limited number of prosecutors, limited number of public defenders. We have other kinds of challenges for misdemeanors in general. In a typical misdemeanor jury trial, and as you know, misdemeanors, you're entitled to a jury trial, so we ask members of the community to come to sit as jurors for 4 days to decide if they can, amongst a group of 12, unanimously whether someone should be found guilty of stealing $60 worth of clothing from Target, which is a typical petty theft that we have in our county. And we have a real challenge of convincing our jurors that the time away from their jobs, their loved ones, their families is important to spend for those days with us in the courtroom. We have a problem of that you've all seen of misdemeanors who then become felons, misdemeanors who commit misdemeanors again and again. We've been thinking in this room, in our county, throughout the country, not just in the last few years, but probably over the last 10 years, but definitely in the last few years, about the collateral consequences of misdemeanors especially. And I mean that in the broadest possible way. I mean that in terms of immigration consequences. So if someone is charged with the petty theft of $60 worth of clothing from Target, and what they're looking at the end of a jury trial is some amount of time in our county jail, but they're also potentially looking at being deported, and what does that mean for how we want to think about whether that's the right thing to do, the fair thing to do, and is it, if we're going to do something different, if we're thinking about that, is that right and fair in thinking about all the other people who commit $60 petty thefts from Target who may not be similarly situated. And then I think the biggest challenge for all the things that we've been thinking about over the last couple of years is the institutional inertia that we have amongst our colleagues, amongst ourselves, of, well, we've always done it this way, so maybe we can't make a change. So one of the things that has been true for me, I've been a prosecutor for 17 years, is really a personal transformation in the way I've been thinking about crime. Because when I first became a prosecutor, and although at that time we did do some kinds of diversion, and those of you familiar with misdemeanor drug offenses for diversion that then from most counties became deferred entry of judgment for being under the influence of various narcotics. That's something that all counties are doing. And but I thought about diversion as something of a dirty word, as an alternative resolution as a dirty word. As a prosecutor, what I was interested in was taking the case to court, finding the person guilty at a jury trial, and having the person go to jail, because that was the most straightforward way to do it. It's the way I thought about it, and it's really part of the culture, let's say, for me as a prosecutor starting out 17 years ago. But I found also in thinking about these things that even in our county where we said, well, we don't really do diversion, and that was really our attitude and what we would say when I started, unlike a lot of other counties that were doing all sorts of things even at that time, was that we had all sorts of alternative resolutions that we were doing on occasion. And I'll give an example of that. If somebody was arrested in San Jose for being .28 walking around on the streets of San Jose, and they are charged with being drunk in public, we then now would have an alternative resolution where rather than spending time in our county jail, if they were willing to go to 10 hours of alcohol counseling, or if they couldn't afford it, 10 AA meetings, and showed us proof of that at the next court date, that we would dismiss their case. And it was an alternate way of thinking about what is the goal that we're trying to get with this person. What we really want is for them not to be so drunk on the streets of San Jose that they're a danger to themselves or others. And how can we prevent them from doing that in the future and hold them accountable for what they've done? So we were already doing some things about that. And so then, thinking about that, thinking about what we were already doing, we started doing something that for us was really big. And it had to do with driving on a suspended driver's license. For our county, that at one time amounted to, in some years, a quarter, in some years, a fifth of all misdemeanor prosecutions we did. This is somebody who has a license suspended by the DMV. Now they're charged with the misdemeanor crime of driving on a suspended license, where ultimately they could be sentenced to time either on the sheriff's work program or ultimately in the county jail if they are convicted of that crime. And we have the same problems we have all over the place with our misdemeanors. You can imagine if we have jurors who are frustrated about coming to sit on a jury trial for a $60 theft from Target, you can imagine the frustration of a juror saying, you got to be kidding me that I'm sitting here for 4 days making a jury determination about whether this person was driving on a suspended driver's license. I didn't even know you had a right to a jury trial for that. And so one of the things that we did was looking at, well, should we even be charging these crimes as misdemeanors? And there's all sorts of, and I know many of you are familiar with, all sorts of different flavors of driving on a suspended license. Our most common flavor of that is where your license is suspended because you haven't paid the right fines and fees at the DMV or in traffic court. So it has to do with you haven't done the thing you were supposed to do for your traffic tickets, for example. And we started charging those instead of as misdemeanors as infractions, so that no matter what happened to the person, they were not going to be taking bed space in our county jail, and we weren't going to be doing a misdemeanor jury trial on driving on a suspended license. We're going to be charging that instead of as a misdemeanor, as an infraction. But then we did something in addition to that that we had already been doing on a smaller scale, and now we're doing it on a much expanded scale is if you're charged even with the infraction of driving on a suspended license, what's going to happen when you plead guilty to that? You're going to get a fine. You're also going to get 2 points on your license. You're going to have an even harder time of getting your license. Your license is still going to be suspended. We're going to see you again. So we started to do what we'd already been doing, but as I said, in a much more expanded way is, all right, we've already made this from a misdemeanor to an infraction, but wait, there's more. If you come back to us in 2 months, having paid all your fines and fees at the DMV and have a California driver's license in your hand, we will reduce your charge from driving on a suspended license to driving without a license. You'll get no more points on your license. You'll plead to that charge, be held accountable for it, and now you'll have your license. It won't be suspended again, and hopefully we're not going to see you anymore. And so it was something that was a big change of people coming back again, changing it from misdemeanor to infraction, expanding the way we were offering this alternate way of thinking about it to keep the people who ultimately are being charged with a crime for basically not doing the thing they were supposed to at the DMV to get their act together, get their driver's license, and hopefully we're not going to see them anymore. And that had a huge effect on our misdemeanor docket. All right, so let's talk about petty theft. Now, this is something that many counties have been doing. We just started doing it a year ago. So last year, we referred 1,200 petty theft cases where people had little or no criminal record. There's a really long list of criteria, but let's just say shorthand, it's little or no criminal record, to pre-filing diversion. And what that means is that instead of us filing a criminal charge in court, we send the potential defendant a letter saying, we're going to file a criminal case against you for stealing $60 of clothing from Target. But if you sign up with this outside agency, a company called Corrective Solutions, and you do their theft awareness program, pay the program fees on a sliding scale, do 16 hours of community service, pay the restitution, if any, that was owed to Target, and show us that within a reasonable amount of time, we'll never file that criminal charge against you. We just won't file it. That'll be a case that never shows up in court at all. And that had, again, a large effect as you start to think about all these things together with the number of cases that we're seeing on our criminal courts that our court staff has to spend time with, our public defenders, our DAs are spending time with, and so ultimately our jail has to spend time with. But now we've been thinking, it's a year later, was it actually working in a way that's good? I want to say, first of all, a way that I hadn't thought about as working in a way that's really good, but I've come to feel is a really good way. Before we started doing this, we were constantly being asked by defense attorneys who had a client with potential immigration consequences, can't you change this charge from a petty theft to a trespass interfering with business or some other charge, because that's not going to have the same immigration consequences. My guy will do 10 extra days in your county jail. He'll spend 30 days in your county jail if you change this charge. And we struggled with those kinds of thoughts because we're committed to thinking about collateral consequences, not just for immigration issues, but for people who, if this charge means that they're going to lose their job, maybe there's a different appropriate charge that they should plead guilty to. But all those things, we were really trading a different charge for maybe more time in our jail. And what happened once we started doing pre-filing diversion for petty thefts is a large number of those questions went away. Because what we were doing for not just people who had collateral consequences, but for everybody got the same deal. We're not saying you get a special benefit if you have an immigration consequence. Everybody who had little or no criminal record got the opportunity to do pre-filing diversion through this program. And we found that the number of questions we got about that was far later. Because if you got to the point where we had actually filed a criminal case against you because you had already failed diversion or had more thefts in your record, then, well, that's just something we're not going to do. And so it helped us not only with our consistency across cases, but with thinking about collateral consequences. When you look at national numbers for recidivism for theft, you're going to see numbers all over the place. I've seen numbers as high as 50%. I've seen 22%. It depends, I think, a lot on who's doing the counting and what their purpose of counting it is. And so my conclusion is that we don't actually know what the recidivism rate is for petty theft. anywhere in the country. Or we do know, and it's very different depending on who's asking. But I took a look at this a little bit because I was interested in what happened with this year that we've been doing this. Now, we've been doing it for a year, so what I did was I took a look at the first 2 weeks of when we started doing this. We referred 66 people in the first 2 weeks to diversion. What happened with those people? It's been a year later. How many of them reoffended? What was the success rate of completing the program? So first of all, as a year as a whole, and it was true also for these 2 weeks, about 2/3 of the people that we offered this to successfully completed it, either within the original time frame or sometimes we gave them a little extra time to do it and re-referred them to give them more time to complete the program. 66% of the people completed it. And I'm told for other counties who do this thing, that's a relatively high rate, although, again, I think it depends on who's counting it and what their purpose is of counting it. So what happened with these people as far as reoffending? Of the total number of people in those first 2 weeks, 9% committed some new crime in the following year, and 6% committed a new theft crime in the following year. So I'll just say I feel that that is a low number. I just feel that it is. What I don't know is what would have happened to those 66 people had we not done pre-filing diversion. But what that number at least tells me is this effort has not at least increased the amount of recidivism. By doing something different from what we were doing in our regular criminal prosecution, we were not seeing huge numbers of these people reoffending and stealing more, and actually, at least I'll say that this number, which I consider to be a good number, we were having good results for how we were doing over the last year. It's not the only way, though, that you can measure success, because remember, one of the things that I told you happened and is definitely true is that the number of cases in our criminal courts went down, and there's some other very local issues with that as well in our county having to do with staffing at the police department. But it's also true that these cases, both charging misdemeanors as infractions, changing whether we're even charging a misdemeanor for petty theft, and a variety of other things along those lines that we were doing, dramatically reduced the number of cases that we were seeing in our criminal misdemeanor courtrooms. I want to ask Megan, do I have time to talk a little bit about prostitution, or should I skip that and talk about some challenges?
I always welcome prostitution.
Oh, she says I always welcome prostitution. I'll just, since she said that, I'll say a funny note. There was recently an article about me in the local newspaper, and there was also an article in the local Mandarin language only paper, and I don't read Mandarin, so I was reading the article about me, and it had this thing about prostitution alternative resolution, and I don't read Mandarin, so I put it into Google Translate, and it said, James Gibbons Shapiro has got a new program in Santa Clara County for sexual activity on the streets. So that was not actually what I was trying to convey, and maybe that was just a translation error. All right, so let's talk a little bit about prostitution. So we have, I think, in our county, and I'll just talk to our county, a jury pool that is of two minds about prostitution. So in the same week, we will have a protest in the streets of San Jose about street prostitution happening in the community. And also, we will have a misdemeanor jury find a defendant not guilty at jury trial, even though there is a recorded statement with an admission about prostitution. Because I think that at the same time our juror pool, our community feels that they do not want to have prostitution in the community, but also at the same time feels bad for the woman who's being charged with prostitution. Feels, and sometimes, and depending on the individual, I feel very strongly this way too, that this young woman may be more of a victim of her pimp than she is a criminal. So what are we doing? What have we started to do to think about this in a different way? And this is a little bit of copying and working on what other counties have also done. You may be doing some of things like this in your county, is we have instituted a program for prostitutes who have little or no criminal record to go to 25 hours of counseling with the idea to try to get them off the streets. They get job training. They have counseling about being a sexual assault victim, and as you know, many prostitutes are sexual assault victims, as a way to get them to think about getting away from their pimp and starting a different kind of life. And it's free for the people who are charged with prostitution. Now, how do we pay for that? We pay for that by the men who are charged with, to use the colloquial term as Johns in the prostitution crime. They have the opportunity, if they have little or no criminal record, to go to a one-day John school. We charge them $2,000 to go to that all day. I hear gasps in the audience. That's a lot of money. I would ask you to look at what are the fines and fees that get charged to a first-time DUI in your county. It's about $2,000. So I would say to you that if we're going to charge someone $2,000 as fines and fees for a first-time DUI, we can charge a John $2,000 to get out of criminal prosecution for his John fee. So go to an all-day school about the effects of prostitution in the community, the effects on them, the health consequences of prostitution, and pay $2,000 as well. And that money goes to pay for the programming for our prostitutes. And we're really just beginning with that. So check in with you later or call me up a year from now and I'll tell you how that's going. But it's an effort to try to deal with, maybe this isn't a crime that our community wants us to prosecute in the same way that we've been doing before, but it's still, our community still wants us to be taking action about it. And so that's what we've been trying to think about. All right, so I want to finish up with some challenges that we've had. And this is a really nuts and bolts challenge. We've had big picture challenges. How are we being fair? I've talked about, is this what we're doing fair to everybody? Is it fair to our whole community? Are we making everybody safer? But I'll just tell you, a really nuts and bolts challenge that we've had is getting the right address. This seems like it is a small problem. If you're charging someone with a misdemeanor crime and you want to let them know about a pre-filing diversion program and you send them a letter about it, you're relying on the person when they were arrested told the police officer their correct address. The officer wrote the correct address on the police report. The DA's office entered the right address in their computer system and conveyed it correctly to the third-party vendor that's running the program. And we've had, I would say that is the number one challenge that we've had. We did have a case where we sent a letter to someone offering pre-filing diversion, and the address that we wrote on the letter was transient. The letter was not delivered. So we've had challenges big and small about it. But overall, in working out those challenges, I feel like I've had a personal transformation in the way I think about prosecution of misdemeanors. It's been a real revolution in our county in the way we've done it, and it's really meant a reduction in the amount of beds that we've taken in our county jail for misdemeanors, which has meant that we've had more bed space available for our felon population that is serving felony sentences in our county jail.